SVC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily Podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the iGaming Daily Podcast. I'm Viktor Kayed, senior journalist for SBC News, and today I'm joined by Danny Lee, one of the men behind the latest SBC Pro iGaming expert, and Ted Menmuir, our SBC content director. It's an honor to have you both here, gents. Ted, how are you feeling?
Very well, man. Good to join you guys up in Manchester.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time out of London. And Danny is in the room with me. Danny, how are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm good. Glad to be back on the podcast. It's been a short while, so I'm ready to dig into some of the breaking news of this week.
But before we get into it, thank you to Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market, which is also the sponsor of today's episode. And there is quite a lot to dive in. Now we're going to head into the Netherlands and we're going to talk about the latest developments with the KOA Act. Me and Ted, we've covered that market quite a lot in recent times. So it's a very dynamic market. It's developing every day. And there have been some developments just as of recently that we're going to go over them. First, though, Ted, can you tell the listeners what is the KOA Act?
Okay, so let's start off with kind of an overview of what's happening in the Dutch market. And I think when you analyse markets such as the Netherlands or Germany, you have to be kind of reflective of their frameworks and how they process laws. The KOA Act reflects the Remote Gaming Act of the Netherlands. And this is a process that took 10 years to unfold and 10 years to reach a settlement, which it did in October 2021, in which it launched the market. Now, following a lot of compromise on that market launch, the regime was put into instant review by the government. And this is amongst the regulatory updrop that the government has been kind of ruptured in the Netherlands. And there's been a lot of divisions and fractures about how that market should take shape, how the licenses should be granted, and which incumbents should be played and what segments should be supervised. So the launch of KOA as a framework has always been ruptured. It's always been kind of fragmented, but also part of the issue here is that from its launch, it was instantly put under review, and we saw kind of ministers come in, provide an instant feedback. And it's been a market that's been active for 2.5 years. However, it's been just scrutinized from point to point.
And because of the scrutiny, there have been a lot of calls for reforms in the KOA Act, and the bigger part of last year saw these reforms come into shape. They were first led by former Minister Frank Verwend. After the country went out of its election cycle, they were spearheaded by the new Legal Protections Minister, Toyn Struycken. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing his name incorrect. But Struycken now wants to, it seems like he's against the reforms that his predecessor initially led. He seems like he has his own vision about how the market should look like. In your article, Ted, the headline was Struycken kills the KOA reform bill. Can you tell us why did you use this specific verb? Because it really comes into my attention.
Okay. So, thank you. I think what is understood about the KOA framework and kind of its heightened scrutiny is that if you were to take it from where it was in 2021 to where it is now, is that the revisions needed or the revisions as undertaken, it's a completely different framework, even proceeding into what it's now going to be its kind of definitive overhaul. So under Frank Verwend, immediately between first 6 months of the year, we saw heightened scrutiny or heightened regulation on advertising. on customer care checks, and on one-on-one protocols with individual customers spending. The other thing is that in year 2, they agreed terms on deposit limits, more kind of customer care checks, and they gave kind of new powers to KSA to implement kind of a tougher scrutiny of licenses.
KSA, sorry to interrupt, is the Dutch gambling regulator.
Yes. So this, again, what's important to understand about the Dutch market is that it hasn't been analog or stagnated. The kind of influx of constant kind of regulation has been constant throughout its existence. However, it appears that none of the parties have been kind of pleased in the overall framework. And for a year now, it's been debated whether they should just kill the COA Act and restart again. Now, Toon Strijkaard, who is now the Legal Protections Minister, has come back and said, look, we will present a new online gambling bill by the end of the year. However, the COA Act will still remain and will still be kind of a placeholder until that transition's over. And he expects kind of those reforms that were agreed on to be implemented. So again, you're going to get a much tougher online gambling marketplace, a much more scrutinized online gambling marketplace in the Netherlands this year.
It's unfathomable. You're talking about a more scrutinized market, and because it is actually being put quite under a big scrutiny as of now. Like you said, like you mentioned, a lot of criticism comes from the political world. A lot of criticism against the KOA market. Ministers like Van Nispen and Bikker, can you talk about the criticism from the political cycle?
So again, it's a lot of this is kind of understanding kind of the frameworks of the Netherlands, and what you're allowed to do as a politician in the Netherlands is you're allowed to present kind of modalities or motions to the House regarding any law. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to be implemented, but that means that they have to be reviewed and voted on to be kind of amendments of existing laws, right? So again, it goes round to Dutch laws being constantly fluid. They can constantly be influenced. They can be constantly like raised up and checked upon. And I think that this is a kind of key condition that no other gambling market has in Europe, where there's this kind of constant revision of the laws, whether they've been implemented, and what are kind of the standards applied, and high oversight with what are kind of the existing conditions of the market. It's very different to what we have in the UK or in markets such as Spain or Italy, where once fixed, those laws, once agreed on, those laws are fixed. In Holland, they can have a kind of continued transfer. Thus, you had kind of this input from the CDU, from the Socialist Party, to kind of re-grab all the existing laws of COA and reform them instantly.
Do you think this system, having no equivalent across Europe, do you think this is something that other countries should take a note of, or do you think it's kind of more detrimental to the quality of the gambling market there?
It depends. It depends. I mean, I think for the new legal protection ministers, he says that he's going to be kind of cooperative across the board with the political parties. Now, again, this is going back to the Kmart. You've got a very divided political spectrum in Holland. And even the government itself is divided by four coalition parties, which, you know, if you compare to the rest of Europe, that would be divided between one or two. The agreement for how kind of how forms are reformed, and also kind of the whole purpose of the coalition itself. They've got to carry a much bigger mandate now, with four parties being involved. So again, it's kind of the backdrop of how kind of gambling laws being kind of reformed against this kind of condition. I think Holland is a very kind of unique place as we see it right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for this insight, Ted. We're going to leave you for a bit to go into a commercial break, and then me and Danny will tell you all about the latest news from Entain.
SBC Summit Rio is back from the 25th to the 27th of February. Join us at Rio Centro for Brazil's biggest betting and iGaming event. Get your tickets now at sbcevents.com.
Welcome back. So, Danny, this is a topic that you've covered on iGaming Expert. It's quite a new story. There are a lot of details around it, and we're going to be happy to hear all about it. And what I'm talking about the Entain lawsuit that was recently launched by two individuals against the company. Can you tell us who these individuals are? First of all, let's start from the basics.
Okay, so it's actually the ex-CEO, Kenny Alexander, who I believe was CEO at Entain between the years of 2007 and 2020, just sort of after this case, or this like Turkish bribery case that's been in the news for so many years now, sort of came into light a bit more, and he was joined in this sort of legal action that's launched this week by ex-chair at the same time, Lee Feldman. So they're the ones behind this.
They're the ones. Those are the two people behind the lawsuit, and they are suing Entain. From what I understand, this Entain, or formerly known as GVC Holdings, they are actually suing the company from the time of its previous naming, and this is when the bribery accusations happened. Can you talk us through the case itself?
Yeah, so obviously when it was known as GVC Holdings, I think it operated an online gaming and sports betting business in Turkey that it did sell back in 2017. I believe it was sold to a company called Ropso Malta Limited. So that company acquired Entain's Turkish business, and there was an investigation into that business not long after that. I believe it launched sort of maybe 2020, because it was found that almost 2 years after Entain or GVC Holdings had sold that business, that they were still accused of benefiting from that business still. Mm-hmm. And it was HMRC that launched the investigation into Entain over potential corporate offending and breaches of, I believe it was Section 7 of the Bribery Act 2010.
So just to summarize, former Entain CEO Kenny Alexander is suing Entain over the £600 million deferred prosecution agreement that was reached with HMRC over the then GVC Holdings alleged bribery case in Turkey from 2019. What are Mr. Alexander, Kenny Alexander, and Lee Feldman, the claimants in this case, after?
So Alexander and Feldman are sort of claiming that there was information handed from Entain and the law firm that were defending Entain at the time, known as Adelshaw Goddard, so they're claiming that they had shared information with the investigators at the time without their consent. Obviously, the CEO of GVC Holdings at the time and the chair, Lee Feldman, at the time, they're claiming that they weren't aware of some of documents or evidence or whatever it is that they're referring to had been shared with the investigators. And it seems that, like, through this legal action that they've launched this week, it's looking like they're trying to find out what exact information was sort of delivered to the investigators and maybe take action from there once finding out what exact information had been handed over.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think if, although let's just say now that Entain has responded to this lawsuit, can you tell us what they replied?
Yeah, so Entain's response was very straightforward, to be honest. They just said that these claims were without merit and that the company will contest it robustly. So it's looking like they're obviously putting up a position of defence against that. And meanwhile, the law firm that were involved, Adelshaw Goddard, they said that they were unable to comment due to client confidentiality obligations that they're subjected to. But it's been a bit of a rejection from Entain, put it that way.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting times for Entain because their CEO stepped down, who joined just over 5 months ago and has just left, which, by the way, must be noted that has nothing to do with the arrangements that we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm sure it's obviously not the best time for them to receive like this sort of legal action or have to defend itself against it, but I'm sure they'll have the proper procedures in place to deal with it without Isaacs or not. I mean, it's obviously a very tumultuous time for the company at the minute, considering that Isaacs has stepped down sort of less than 6 months after assuming the role as CEO. So there's a lot going on at the company at the minute, and having this sort of Turkish bribery case that they've been embroiled in for like well over half a decade now, sort of rise up again, is certainly not going to be ideal for the operator at the minute.
Yeah, nice insight, Danny. Thank you for this story. Thank you for covering it. Thank you for diving into the details for us. All right, that's all the time that we had for today. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Danny and Ted, for providing your expertise on the latest news from the SBC Media Network. What we've just discussed, you can read in the links from the podcast description below. And that was me, Viktor Kayed. See you in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.